He is the most feared political activist in America, Chris Rufo. He's on a hot streak, and he joins us right now. I'm James Poulos. This is Zero Hour. Christopher Rufo is a senior fellow and director of the Initiative on Critical Race Theory at the Manhattan Institute. He's also a contributing editor of City Journal, where his writing explores a range of issues, including critical race theory, of course, gender, ideology, homelessness, addiction, crime, and all of the other horrible things happening in the United States of America. Lots of other great stuff. We're going to get into it right now. Chris, how are you doing?
Doing very well. How are you?
All right. Well, I'm good. You know, this has been a weird year, and still a little bit of time left to go. You've been very busy, so I want to run through all these things that you're up to and help people understand how they all fit together. Let's see. You got a fellowship at the Manhattan Institute. You got a book, America's Cultural Revolution. You're on the board of the new college in Florida, and then you're also making documentaries and doing some other stuff in your spare time. What's the logic for doing all of these things at once?
Well, a bit of experimentation. And so every year I set a goal for myself. I set a kind of objective for the work that I'm doing in that year. And then I see what works, what doesn't work. Now is about that time, December. I usually start to slow down a bit and decide, well, what did I do this year that was worthwhile? What did I do that was not worthwhile? But the goal for this year on the policy front was to abolish the DEI bureaucracies in state universities. We got it done in Florida, Texas, and Iowa. I think we'll see some other states starting to adopt that policy. We did this great reform effort at New College, and a lot of my reporting and media work has been in service to that effort.
Where's the tipping point on DEI? Is this thing going to be dead in a year? What do you think?
Yeah, I think in public universities in red states, it will be dead or dying in many places. So, once you get Florida and Texas to do something, it gives permission to all those smaller red states to do the same. You see a copycat effect as it goes down the chain by state size and state influence. The risk is gone. The model is there. Legislators want to get a win that is safe. That's the kind of sweet spot for them. But look, DEI more broadly is entrenched, it's institutionalized, it's very strong, it's not going anywhere in blue states, in public universities, and then in private corporations. I think we're seeing maybe something of an inflection point. Many companies are starting to shed those jobs, starting to turn away from the more kind of left-wing racialist DEI programs, but that fight is still uncertain at the current moment.
I think there are two models in a lot of people's heads right now. On the one hand, you got folks who say, well, ultimately, we can't hang together. We're just going to kind of go into two corners of the same big room and do what it is that we think is best, the left and the right. The other model is, no, it's going to be battle royale. Two can enter, only one can leave. Which one do you think is right?
I think there's probably a bit of both operating on two different levels. At the state level, it's going to be states deciding their own way. I think that for the most part, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the states were homogenizing as a matter of policy. Blue states, red states were, within the same range or within the same part of that spectrum. We're seeing them polarize on policy to a dramatic degree on the institutions that matter for people. K through 12 education is polarizing. Public universities are polarizing. Of course, economic policies that have been more polarized in the past continue to polarize into the future. So that is good, I think, especially for red states that are deciding, hey, wait a minute, we can't just be pulled by the gravity of left-wing cultural policies. We have to set our own clear boundaries, our own clear direction. But at the federal level, it is still a winner-take-all system. That is how it works. And so there'll be much more contentious fighting. And so in my own work, I try to put wins on the board every year. That's what motivates me. That's what gets me excited. That's what satisfies my desires. So this year, I've spent almost all of the time focusing on state level policy, running up wins in Florida, running up wins in Texas, running up wins in Iowa, running up wins in other states. But we'll see next year, 2024, possibly there'll be a change in power at the federal level. And that's where you have to take that battle royale mindset and go in and fight it out.
You think Trump is going to come through here? You think we're going to have the White House in 2024, or at least the Republican Party?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a kind of horse race analyst. I try not to think about it. I just decide that those questions are beyond my capacity to really influence. And so I just wait to see what the status quo is. I wait to see what the situation looks like, and then I devise a plan or a strategy for achieving my objectives. But I don't know. I think there are too many unknowns. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot, and I'll have a piece coming out shortly about this, is 2024. There is a possibility, a potential, I think, a rising and meaningful potential for great disorder. You have left-wing activist factions and militant groups starting to reemerge in the streets with pro-Hamas demonstrations. If Trump is the nominee, that could re-energize that kind of political movement, even kind of violent left-wing political movement. On the other side, you have the former President Trump, if he is the nominee, has a meaningful chance of being convicted of federal crimes, and that would launch the country into chaos from another vector. So there are so many unknowns. I think it's probably irresponsible to predict, but whatever the situation is, however it resolves, I always think there's a way to win. And so I never invest much of my hopes in individual elections. You win, you lose, doesn't really matter over the long term. I just try to figure out what the situation is and how I can successfully navigate it.
Well, then let's talk for a minute about that social unrest. You did tweet, I think it was yesterday, suggesting that people prepare for another riot season in 2024. How do we prepare?
Well, I mean, this is another important part of it. So exactly the dynamic we've been discussing. State level GOP governors can take action right now to prevent a redux of 2020 kind of George Floyd summer of rioting. And look, I think the basic takeaway from 2020 is pretty simple. It yielded immediate political results for the Democratic candidate Joe Biden. People forget, but I visited D.C. to go to the White House at the very end of October, very beginning of November in 2020, and D.C. was boarded up. Shopkeepers were boarding up their windows. There were barricades around all the important buildings. There were huge contingents of law enforcement because the left had made the explicit and implicit threat: if Trump wins, we riot. We will put American cities into chaos. We will destroy the quality of living in urban centers in protest of a Trump victory. I think it had a marginal but maybe a decisive impact on how people voted. The left ratcheted up tensions to such a great degree, I'm convinced, intuitively at least, that many voters decided to vote for Biden or not to vote for Trump simply to reduce the level of stress, simply to say, let's opt out, let's just kind of hit the button and put a pause, put Joe Biden in as a placeholder, reduce the tensions. And so that logic may work again, depending on the inciting incident, one of which may arise or may not arise. But GOP governors can take steps to prevent that, to kind of undercut those movements and networks that are, activated in times of in times of heightened political conflict. And then, of course, the federal government seems to be relatively less interested in pursuing that kind of disruptive activity or monitoring activity of violent factions on the left. So either way, conservatives should have a contingency plan for how to handle this, both at the administrative level, the law enforcement level, but perhaps more importantly, given a national election at stake, as far as communications and PR. They cannot be caught flat-footed should that possibility arise.
You spent a lot of time in your book, America's Cultural Revolution, talking about how really what was going on was an intellectual revolution, a sort of dictatorship of the intellectuals coming out of academia and spreading out through the rest of society, bringing us to where we are today. You got to spend some time thinking about, what makes these folks tick, what the agenda, what the approach is coming from the other side. Yes, it's possible to do another summer of riots or election season of riots. There's another road, though, isn't there? Which is why not just lock down the internet? If you can sort of monitor everything that everyone's doing all the time, maybe you can just pre-crime everyone before the unrest starts. That seems like that's definitely part of the agenda in the mix there. Arguably, of course, you could have both. You could sort of pre-arrest everyone who you think is your political enemy and then send your political allies out into the streets to rage. How do you see the balance of that working out, and what can we do about the technological consolidation?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Those are both dynamics at play. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive by any means. In fact, I think they're mutually reinforcing. If you look at the great justifications for censorship online, I think COVID was number one, and COVID is, of course, the context from which the BLM riots emerged. I think that was the trial run for using, we can call it maybe offline disorder for online censorship. I think those are really ratcheting in the same direction. And then, of course, on the more ideological side, I think gender was another kind of main focus of censorship. So you have race, gender, medicine, social control, and COVID. Those are the three topics. It could be any number of topics. I think that it is an opportunistic strategy, but certainly the prerequisite for an actual justification or rationalization of censorship, as well as its implementation, it always comes from some chaos, some disorder, some great conflict. And so the more chaos, disorder, and conflict that moves through the body politic in a physical way, in a real way, in an offline way, let's say, you see that used as a justification for controlling discourse online. In addition to the standard, political correctness that's been more or less the same since, you could say, the 90s. Those things will always be off limits, crime statistics or whatnot. But I think that the innovation happening there, kind of malign innovation, is on any issue that creates stress, that creates unease, that creates disorder. We saw that recently in Canada. We've seen that recently, even more recently in Ireland. Street disorder justifies censorship. And so I think for the right, and perhaps this is related, I think for the right, kind of public demonstrations are too high risk. They often, there's very little upside and there's an enormous downside. And so my counsel to people on the right, to conservatives, is if you want to protest, if you want to voice your concerns in a public forum, make sure you're doing it in a way that is unimpeachable as far as your conduct, your speech, your affect, your dress, and do it within the constraints or within the structures of legitimate, democratic, kind of above board function, like school boards. Having moms and dads come and wearing their work clothes, protesting at school board meetings is an effective means of protest for the right. Any kind of other street-based protest, I think it's got all downside. I think it's a mistake. I think it should be avoided at all costs.
You talk a lot about how so much of what's going on under the cover of whether it's ESG or DEI, pick your alphabet, your three-letter combination, is really just an anti-whiteness campaign. And I think, there's a lot to that. One of the things that I'm tracking, though, especially with regard to the internet, is it's really a language of anti-hate. And hate kind of becomes this, this category that all the anti-whiteness ultimately serves. It's very convenient how you can use anti-hate as a justification to go after anyone, regardless of whether they have three heads or what race they are. And that seems to be the attack vector that they're using in order to consolidate all of that online control, really effectively nationalize the internet and put it, make it an in-house operation of woke apparatchiks. Do you think that the anti-whiteness campaign is something that's going to remain dominant, or do you think that what we're looking at here is the category of like evil is being turned into this category of hate, and so it's really going to be fair game on political opponents, regardless of which identity boxes they check? We've seen them go after, whether it's the Proud Boys or other organizations, where it's not your sort of corn-fed white American male who's in the crosshairs. It's a member of someone from a little bit more vibrant and diverse background who happens to be identified as somehow a white nationalist, even though they're not even white.
Yeah, well, a number of things there. Yeah, I mean, certainly what the left excels at, what they really have elevated into a kind of genius, is using euphemisms that have, let's say, like a sign, in linguistic terms, a sign, hate, very powerful word, but also a kind of very abstract and ill-defined word. And then what they take is that single sign, the word hate, H-A-T-E, and then the signified, so the meaning of that sign is bifurcated depending on what we could maybe even just call a friend-enemy distinction in those terms. And so the meaning of that word has two totally different and almost opposing meanings depending on who is the speaker and who is the receiver of that word. And then it's justified, it's used to justify and obscure a selective enforcement against hate. And so on any line, whether it's race, gender, class, the great trio, what I've seen is that there is a kind of cycling process on the left over the course of, let's say, a generational cohort, maybe slower sometimes, faster at other times, where it cycles. The main vector or the main axis of attack is on class, is then on race, is then on gender. In the last cycle, I think you could say that following the Great Recession, it was class, it was Occupy Wall Street, it was the 99%, that was it. That kind of cycled out as the economy grew, as those people were exposed as being kind of nutcases. Then it was race, starting at the end of the Obama term, accelerating into the Trump term. Then when that really devolved into defund the police in 2020 and Black Lives Matter kind of shattered itself as a movement, that receded, and then it was coming on gender the last few years with the trans movement. And so there is a cycling underneath the process of a general euphemistic frame where you can enforce, let's say, anti-hate censorship or anti-hate legislation in a ruthlessly selective manner, while always maintaining that kind of neutral, gauzy rubric above it.
Thank you, Professor. That was a very well compressed lecture there. I want to talk about the Logos Fellowship in a minute here, but before we get there, you've spearheaded lots of anti-DEI, really anti-woke legislation. Do you think that we need anti-Borg legislation in this country, whether at the state or the federal level, to make sure that the internet doesn't become this thing that sort of eats us all with whatever kind of hate term they want to use to get us there?
I mean, that's a great question, and maybe so I can answer that in a way that is productive. I mean, what would that look like? And perhaps you can be a bit more specific in what you might see as a proposal.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way I like to think about these things is Americans have historically been a very competent and confident people when it comes to their relationship with their technology, really a nation of tinkerers, people who can roll up their sleeves, we're going to slide under the car, poke around in there, figure out what's not working. There's that iconic scene in, I think, Apollo 13, the film, where the guys have to dump all the spare parts out on the table and figure out how they're going to prevent the craft from hurtling off into the void of space. Some of that can be overly dramatized or romanticized or whatever, but I think the fact remains that for a long time, almost from the beginning, Americans were very comfortable around their technology. They didn't feel alienated from it. They didn't feel inferior to it. They didn't feel confused or threatened by it. They felt like they had the goods spiritually and just sort of in manual competence to just keep things running, to keep that relationship balanced, and to make sure that they used the tools that were at their disposal, one, to improve their living conditions, but also to protect the important things, protect their way of life, protect their humanity, protect their form of government. We got a Second Amendment right there. A gun is a tool. And so now the question is, well, what happened? Why are so many Americans sort of reduced to this very servile and even to the point of mental illness, kind of weak relationship with their technology, where they feel dependent upon it, isolated by it, at the mercy of these people you don't know the names, can't vote them in, can't vote them out. They seem to be in control of everything. What can just one person do? Well, I think the direction we need to go in is to say, look, First Amendment, freedom of speech, it doesn't really have teeth if you don't have free association. You look at the Second Amendment, right to bear arms. What is that? Well, it's ensuring that people are able to utilize the fundamental defensive technologies or tools that are available just generally throughout society to protect and defend themselves and those they love and care about. How does that apply in a world like today where digital technology is dominant? Well, it seems to me that points in the direction of ensuring constitutionally that ordinary American people have the protected right to use and access fundamental digital technologies, whether that's high-powered GPUs or Bitcoin, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in general, I think that is great. I support that, and I think your characterization of the American relationship to technology is spot on. I spent a lot of time recently reading the founders, reading about the founders, and you have great inventors like Ben Franklin, but even Thomas Jefferson, if I read it correctly, invented the swivel chair. I'm sitting in a swivel chair right now, and we could thank Jefferson for that. But more importantly, what I think that we get from the founders that might be applicable to the situation is that when they were talking about liberty, it really meant freedom from domination, freedom from domination by great powers. It meant the ability to carve out your own homestead, your own small farm, your own cottage industry, your own life, to use the great blessings that we have as a country. In the way within certain moral constraints, political constraints, of course, in a way that you see fit. And so they would take unjust domination and offer you kind of rights-based protection against it. I think that is the situation that you're describing with technology, not with startups. I think startups should be given utmost latitude to build products, but to entrenched and monopolistic players, a Microsoft, a Google. They have an enormous power over the individual American. It strikes me that Americans, let's say for social media censorship, for example, have no recourse to this. And the founders also believe that a man's reputation was part of his basic collection of rights. He has a right to his reputation, or at the bare minimum, to defend his reputation. I think that the cancellation of individuals, wiping them from the internet, wiping them from the banking system, is a system of domination that should be submitted to democratic deliberation. And especially in the case of social media, the media can destroy your reputation and then erase you from the internet, meaning that you have no ability to defend your reputation. That strikes me as wrong. It strikes me as justifiable to intervene through legislation, given what the founders had said about it, given their basic ideas of liberty and reputation. And so, look, I think that I think that this is a question that should be submitted to public deliberation, and I think that the right, politically, has to get beyond the old posture of simply doing service for corporations, serving as the party of corporate interests. And while I believe in a free market, I believe in entrepreneurship, I believe in innovation, I think that to a large extent, corporate interests are aligned with our national interests, with our interests as citizens. There are certain domains where I think that the citizen must be protected against the domination of some of these organized and large interests.
Well, amen to that. Let's talk about the fellowship. This is the Manhattan Institute Logos Fellowship. It's pretty new. You were joking the other day that it started out as a tweet, or what was once known as a tweet, and now it really exists. A school for activists. How do you make sure that these activists actually do things that are constructive? Most people on the right, they hear the word activist, they kind of shudder. Just think about those people out in the streets waving the signs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a very specific type of activist, but I would say that the basic concept is, I think I've done some good work, effective work that has led to results, legislation in almost 24 states, an executive order changing the national debate on issues like critical race theory, most prominently. Also working on some of the gender ideology in schools, getting DEI abolished in a number of states, turning that into a political concept or debate. And so the last few years, I've learned a lot, really 3 years. I've learned a lot about how to do this. And the idea is that I can continue to do these campaigns, CRT, gender, DEI. I could just do another one next year. But what if, instead of doing that, we trained a new cohort of people that have the same kind of maybe capacity or promise, and give them the resources, the guidance, the connections, the kind of lift up, so they can do so as part of a cohort of people, as part of a group of people, and that expands, cohort after cohort, or maybe year after year, so they can take some of these kind of new media warfare kind of culture warfare tactics, and be successful on a wider range of issues. And we have applications streaming in. I think that many of them are very promising. But how can you be? How can we kind of offer assurances that it'll be successful? I think you can never offer assurances to a total extent, but to a limited extent. I think that the right has to have two things in mind with activism. One is you need a concrete result or objective that you're seeking that can be boiled down into a slogan. This year, my slogan was abolish DEI, and then everything else filtered into that very simple slogan that was outcome oriented, that suggested a desired result. Be very clear about that. And then the second thing is that you have to have a desire to put wins on the table. I mean, a lot of people on the right, unfortunately, are very engaged in intellectual work, but very disengaged from translating that intellectual work into any tangible result. I think that there's a place for knowledge for knowledge's sake, but for those of us who are in think tank world, policy world, media world, I think that we need to have the attitude and then the skills to actually deliver wins. And then one kind of heuristic that I always kind of oriented my own work towards, and perhaps it's useful for others to think about, is what is that ceremony? What is that moment? What is that souvenir that you want to keep at the end of your culture war fight? For me, I've become a pen collector. And what that means is that when I have inspired a presidential order or legislation in Florida or legislation in another state, the governor or the president will sign the bottom of the piece of paper, and I try to collect those pens and then put them on my wall as celebrations, or bill text, that kind of thing. Those are trivialities in some ways. They're curios or souvenirs, but the idea is that there is a moment where you win. And what does that moment look like? And how can you get there? How can you experience that? And then how can you create a kind of coherent life narrative around it? And certainly at least a kind of working narrative around it.
Well, I'm a pen collector myself. Every time I go to a different hotel or check into the studio, I cop a free pen. So we are not too far apart.
You are, and every time you are racking up another win. Yeah,
that's right. Seriously though, talking about graduating these activists, so to speak, I almost want to say it's like the Teal Fellowship, but you actually think kids should still go to college, at least certain colleges, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look. You're going to have like eccentric geniuses that drop out of Harvard and Stanford and University of Washington and found tech companies, but that is not translatable to a mass scale. That is a very idiosyncratic and a very individual decision, and so for the rest of the folks, and for a political movement broadly. There's this meme on the right that you shouldn't go to college and that colleges are evil and we should destroy them rather than assimilate to them. I think it's such a mark of inferiority. I think it is a mark of self-sabotage. I think that it is completely wrong-headed. Universities, at their best, are the crowning achievement of our civilization. We've had kind of, let's say, modern universities in the West beginning in Italy and France, and then in England, and then the United States, for 1,000 years. And we should not abandon them simply because some idiots have hijacked humanities departments. We should reconquer them. We should retake them. We should reform them. We should improve them. But even from a pragmatic point of view, you cannot have a functioning political movement of high school graduates. It may sound harsh, it may sound elitist, but it's 100% true. We need people on the right that have impressive educational credentials at the undergraduate level, at the PhD level, that could go into academia, at the JD level, so they can go into law, so that they become clerks and then judges, and then even at the, let's say, the MD level, to push back against gender ideology, for example. And so these credentials matter. They don't matter for everyone. A Bill Gates or a Mark Zuckerberg or whoever else can drop out of college and be successful. I know folks that have done so. The trades are a great way to make money, to have a family, to be an entrepreneur, to be a small proprietor. I think there's no denigrating that path. I think it's very important. But politics is a game of elites. It always has been in the United States. It always will be. And so we have to have elites that at least can notch those credentials before they join our political movement.
Well, as a PhD myself, I think I'm probably congenitally unable to disagree with you about that. But, there is this sort of phenomenon, maybe you've seen it yourself, where it's almost become embarrassing to mention the fact that you have one of these higher degrees, one of these advanced degrees. It's like, oh, you pompous ass, what are you trying to prove? If the universities are so good, and if higher education is so wonderful, and if it's such a capstone achievement in Western civilization, then how did it go so wrong? I'm not sure that I buy the idea that it's just like, well, there was this moment in the 60s and we got some bad eggs in there, and then there was sort of like their bad ideas caught on. Isn't there something more serious going on here? Something about the spiritual fiber of the country, of the people, where suddenly academia turns into a woke madrasa instead of what it used to be, where you got crosses on the walls in the classrooms, you got plaques on all the universities, a chapel on every campus. That's how much of that transformation is something that can just be chalked up to some intellectual trends in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, I think the intellectual trends in the 70s are the proximate cause, but not the deepest cause. I wrote a book about the proximate cause, so I think it's actually really important. I think that's where you get the kind of textural change. That's where you get the ideological expression of the change. The deeper forces, as you suggested, I think secularization is a huge part of that. Universities were, in the West, Christian, the highest discipline until the kind of modern period was theology. There was kind of an avenue towards understanding God, towards revealing different facets of God's creation. That was the idea. I think there's a displacement of that telos that has now been substituted with a kind of bureaucratic arrangement. So you have the corporatization or bureaucratization of the university. So DEI has replaced the pursuit of truth, let's say. That's part of it. And another big part of it that is under discussed is something that is maybe some uncomfortable to say. It sounds awful to a certain extent, but too many people are going to university. That is a fact. I believe in 1970, about 10% of Americans had a college degree. We're now approaching about 40% of Americans with a college degree. And because of how age demographics work, that means that even a higher percentage of younger people are pursuing a college degree. I do not think that you can have a meaningful kind of liberal arts education for rather a meaningful and rigorous university education for 50% of your population. I don't think that that's how it works. I think that the real reason for the collapse in standards of the university is that it's become disproportionate to its function in society. I think that we should actually see fewer people attending universities. I think that the university, kind of the four-year university, should actually contract in size to be a kind of elite education tailored towards the most capable, let's say 10%, at most 15, 20%. And then the other functions of the university should be broken up into technical education, to kind of apprenticeship programs, to trade programs. So the kind of great, the great practical arts should be broken out away from the university. The university should be consolidated back into something that is for the, let's say, the talented 10th, to borrow a phrase from 100 years ago, of American society, that is geared towards people of the greatest intellectual talent. I think just by doing that, just by restricting it to a kind of what people may sneeringly say a cognitive elite, doing it based on the kind of their talents and virtues rather than their politics or their DEI categorizations, I think many of the problems in universities would be solved, and many of the worst people that you see in universities, people that are these ideological mediocrities, would also not have entry into such a system, because they'd be the people that are in the kind of the lowest quintile, let's say, of aptitude for intellectual work.
Well, I think there's absolutely no question that when it comes to academia, something's got to give. I think there's just going to be an automatic filter. The prices are just going up so much. They're charging more and more. You know as well as anyone, the administrative element on campus is growing faster than anything else, even faster than inflation and the cost of education. And that's just going to tap people out. In some cases, just because they can't afford it. In others, because it's that gut check moment. I mean, I remember this. Growing up, you probably do too. There was a real wave among parents at the time where it was a panic, a scramble to get your child into college, and beyond that, to get them into quote unquote the best college you could get them into. Now, that's obviously coming from the right place, and it was a different economy, and there was still this I think ultimately naive belief that the more technology increased and the more of a productive economy we had, the more jobs and the more flourishing there would automatically be, and the more pie there would be for everyone. I think we're starting to see that tech doesn't really care about our feelings in that respect, and the situation is a lot more complicated. But you wrote your book, I think very very. Wisely nailing the intellectual class for succumbing to some of the bad ideas that are now taking hold in our institutions. Isn't part of the problem here, isn't what went wrong with academia, that Americans really just started to almost worship intelligence. They thought, wow, if the smarter my child is, the better off they'll be. The more intelligent someone is, the more they can be trusted. Smarts is going to save us. Smarts is going to give us power. Smarts is going to make the world a perfect place.
Yeah, I think it's the worship of intelligence and credentials, and so I see this happening a lot. Where I've talked with a number of very wealthy people in very exclusive neighborhoods of the best cities, let's say, calling me to say, hey, I have my kid at this $60,000 a year private school, but they're doing CRT, they're doing DEI, they're doing kind of promoting the kind of trans interventions. What do I do? And it says, well, why is your child in that school anyway? Well, this is you've got to get here so then you can get into the Ivies, and they feed you here and they do this. And so I think a lot of it is just even among our elite colleagues and friends and other people in these circles, a lot of it is snapping that addiction to prestige that is forcing them to compromise their values and principles. I think that's a big part of it. I think that the worship of pure intelligence is also a big part of it. Even on the right, there's a kind of fetishization of IQ that I see in certain quarters. And look, I get it. Being intelligent in a highly technological society is an enormous advantage. It's always been an enormous advantage. But I think, again, if you look at the work of the founders, if you look at Jefferson, if you look at Adams, what they said, to me, the things that I've been rereading still resonate. They talked about what they do not want is an artificial aristocracy. They actually used that kind of beautiful and very modern sounding phrase. I think that the artificial aristocracy in our time is the kind of prep school, master the DEI kind of vocabulary, enter into the Ivies and go work at McKinsey running their diversity initiatives. That's like the kind of prototypical path. But for them, it was an aristocracy. They didn't want the artificial aristocracy. They wanted an artificial aristocracy. They wanted a true aristocracy of talent and virtues. And so talent, I think we can now maybe summarize as intelligence, let's say. It's loosely equivalent in the modern period. But we've forgotten about the virtues. And so intelligence that is not tethered to a set of virtues can be very evil can accomplish a lot of evil in the world. And so we need to revive not only a kind of appreciation or cultivation of intelligence. We shouldn't be anti-intelligence either. I mean, that's not great, not a great path. But we should make sure that we have not just evaporated the virtue component, that is the other side of it. And so I think even in my own life, I know people who are intelligent and lack virtues. I think they're some of the people who are doing the most harm to our country. And I see many people in my daily life who are maybe not as intelligent, but are very virtuous. And I think these are the people who right now, for the time being, are holding our society up and making it functional. And so I'd like to see a kind of reuniting or kind of coming together of those two components, so that we can recompose a social elite that will be actually working towards the benefit of the country.
Well, I think that's pretty well said. When it comes to virtue, none of us is without sin, but I think we have gotten ourselves into this sort of cultural predicament where people say, well, the virtues can't really simulate intelligence, but if you're smart enough, your intelligence can simulate any virtue. It can simulate anything. You can pretend to be anything good if you're just smart enough. That seems to me a big trap. And I think to a degree, when you look at what the woke movement is all about, I think that they are trying to respond to a situation where it looks like smarts have taken over, automation, artificial intelligence, artificial aristocracy, the kind of rule of deterministic math, deterministic materialism seems like it's taken over, and their response is, well, wait a minute, this isn't justice. Only we, the spiritually pure, can create real justice. So the answer is to just put us, the spiritually pure ones, in charge of all the institutions. You and I are going to say, like, no, that's actually a really bad idea. But I do think that they do have a correct insight, which is if there's no spiritual renaissance here, we are going to fall prey to a kind of servile relationship with that artificial or that automated kind of intelligence. So they've got their sort of spiritual renaissance that they're working on. So, like, where's ours? What kind of spiritual renaissance do we need?
Well, I think that is 100% right, and the reason why the intelligence cannot simulate or serve as a substitution for virtue is because they come from different sources. Intelligence is a product of the mind, a product of reason. The virtues are a product of habit and the product of affect or emotion. They stem from different sources. They require different methods of cultivation. They may or may not be correlated in any way. I don't know. That'd be some interesting research to do. In my experience, they're not strongly correlated always, but that's probably a kind of socially changeable dynamic. But what I think we have, and what you're describing, is a very interesting situation. Something that, my wife worked in big tech for many years, and so I got a chance to meet many people in my political work. I know many people in kind of the elite tech world. What I see is you have a kind of let's say atheistic or kind of apolitical engineering type, computer science types, computer engineering types, who are just fascinated with the world of technology, that develop all these great technologies. They don't imbue it with an ideology because they're unideological. But then what you have is you have people who are, so you have very high IQ, very high kind of spatial capacity, engineering types that make the technology. And then you have essentially the telos of the technology, the constraints of the technology, the moral application of the technology is decided by social workers. Social workers, of course, if you look at the kind of GRE scores, having like the lowest of any kind. But they have a very advanced ideology. It's DEI ideology, let's say, just to summarize it in a very concise way. And so what you have is like AI. You have some of the most brilliant technical minds creating these really powerful machines that I think could be tremendously beneficial for our country, for human beings more genuinely. But they're regulated by people who have the kind of most kind of just awful, this kind of moral scolding, but totally untethered from any real moral tradition. Kind of the morality of social workers is imposed and now controls the technology. So you can say, make me a poem praising Donald Trump, and it will say, I can't because Donald Trump is a hate figure. It's like, what I'm shocked by is that, first of all, these companies feel a necessity to do so. I'm shocked by, secondarily, that the engineers who create the technology would allow themselves to be neutered by the DEI officer. And then I'm also kind of shocked by, as a third component, that the public would not demand something better, would not demand technology that is oriented towards maybe kind of pure technical capacity, as the engineers would like, or oriented towards something higher than this kind of politically correct scolding and kind of school marm smothering of our great technological innovations.
Yeah, I was shook by that inability to write a nice poem about Donald Trump too. Major 2001 Space Odyssey vibes. I can't do that, Dave. It's fascinating to watch this in real time, and we'll see if Elon can offer up something else a little bit different. Although I wonder, if the more we look for AI to save us, the worse off we're going to be. I do want to talk about New College in Florida. Ron DeSantis has been out on the campaign trail a lot. Wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. He still did a lot of good stuff in Florida. Still time left on the clock down there. You guys have been busy down there. New board comes in, takes the college, turns it into something very different from what it once was. What are the lessons that you've gotten this year working on that project? And how do you think that those lessons can be applied and taken up outside of Florida and other red states?
Yeah, I mean, all credit to Governor DeSantis. I mean, he is an incredible leader. He's an incredible executive. He is really brilliant at both the strategic and the tactical level. I've been just blown away in all of my conversations and all the time I've spent with him, observing how he works, observing how he thinks and plans and executes. But the plan at New College was pretty simple. Appoint a new board of kind of activists, strong, conservative intellectuals and other and lawyers and other figures. Replace the leadership of this small, very left-wing college in Sarasota, Florida. Bring on new administration, new employees, new faculty members, and revive it as a classical liberal arts institution that is a home for conservative scholars, a home for conservative intellectuals, a home for conservative families, a place where they can send their kids and to know that they're going to get a balanced education informed by the classical traditions of the West, and then, of course, of American civilization more specifically. And to say that in a conservative state, there is no law of nature that all universities have to be rabidly left-wing. That is a status quo that is unacceptable, and we're going to actually take concrete steps to change it. And I think that the biggest lesson for conservatives and for other states is, conservatives have been complaining about the capture of the universities since, in a prominent way, since the closing of the American mind, since the 80s, since the 90s. It's now been, multiple generations of conservatives complaining and losing ground on this fight. It's time to reverse that. I just don't accept that we can complain about something for 40 years and take no action to solve the problem. And so Governor DeSantis deserves enormous credit. He is the only political figure in the United States to say, I have an actionable plan to reverse the ideological capture of higher education. We're going to start with a small experiment at New College of Florida, the smallest university in the public system in Florida. And then we're going to go from there. We're going to work up the chain. We're going to try other strategies, other tactics. And so this is the kind of policy that we need to have. And conservative intellectuals, that is the realm that both the kind of circle that both you and I travel in. I think we have to have a real gut check. We have to have a real honest moment with ourselves. Are we doing literature or are we doing politics? That is to say, are we writing about it in a pure intellectual capacity, or are we going to be writing about it and then moving towards the mode of statesmanship, of governance, of practical politics? I think both are valuable, but I think that it's important to understand exactly what you are doing as an individual, what we are doing as more broadly as a movement. And I hope that this small gambit at New College, which I think is going very well, could inspire similar models, inspire similar actions elsewhere in the country.
Well, I think it's going to have that effect. Things are just coming to a head. People want alternatives, and like you said, this is not rocket science. It just takes some people who understand what the stakes are, understand how to actually make moves in the practical, real world level instead of inside of their head. And I think that kind of those kinds of successes are contagious. You're a Renaissance guy, and that gives an interviewer an embarrassment of riches. So I thank you for that. We got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to zig to just one more spot on the Chris Rufo map, and that's documentary film. You've been doing this for a long time. It's obviously something you love to do. You just had a little something out on, I think, on what's going on with New College and the successes down there. To my mind, you're right. There is too much intellectualism. There's too much of an inclination to just say, hey, if we just read the right books, like everything's going to be okay, you guys. Obviously, reading good books is great and everything, but there's a lot being left on the table. And some of what's being left on the table there isn't just concrete political action, although that's definitely true, but also artistic work. There's a huge world out there of real artistry, real sort of public art that people can watch and learn from and enjoy and connect with and see truth about the human condition shared in a way that's powerful and isn't just the kind of script that you get out of Disney nowadays. I mean, I think they lost $50 billion this year. You've had a much better year than the Walt Disney Company or Bob Iger, and it's gotten so bad that a guy like Elon Musk can sort of almost go to the Magic Kingdom and give them a one-finger salute. So this to me is clear evidence that there is a real opportunity, yes, for people on the right, not just people on the right, but folks in that space to tell stories, to present the human condition in a way that really resonates and brings some vitality back to that area. As a filmmaker, how do you handicap that space? Do you agree that there's a lot of room, and what would you advise people who want to move in that direction themselves?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of room. I think there's an enormous opportunity, but I also think that it's very difficult. It's a very difficult challenge, and I think one of the there are kind of two problems on the right, let's say, as far as culture. One is the structure of culture, and the other is the kind of content or aesthetics of the culture. Structurally, the kind of let's say Disney is representative of a mass commercial enterprise that has production, marketing, and distribution built into it at a global scale. Nothing on our side. I mean, it's like nothing on our side can even compare. The closest is News Corp, Fox News, HarperCollins, et cetera, which I think is a kind of one of our key assets, very important. But if you look at more, because that's political news, it's a little bit different. But if you look at kind of more artistic creation, there is no, Sundance Film Festival. There is no network of grant makers in the arts. There are no conferences of the arts. So when I was a pure documentary filmmaker, doing the film festival circuit, selling films to PBS, putting a film out to Netflix, you kind of learn the circuit and you work the circuit, you get money from the circuit, you show your films at the circuit, you have your kind of relationships built at the circuit. I mean, it just doesn't exist on the right. There's just nothing. However, on the opposite side, there is a kind of direct to audience possibility that wasn't the case 10 years ago when I started in documentary, 15 years ago, actually, when I started in documentary. And so conservatives, I've been putting these little short documentaries right on Twitter, and they're getting millions of views. They're getting comments from Elon Musk. They're driving news coverage. They're getting, kind of making the rounds in clips and secondary media. So there's a kind of opportunity there. The second problem, though, is an aesthetic problem. You can't really make art that is explicitly ideological. So a lot of conservative, quote unquote, art is like, let's raise $25 million and make a fiction, film adaptation of an Ayn Rand novel, and like stuff the ideology right into the audience's mouth. Nobody wants that. Those films are going to lose money. Those films are going to be awful. It's just they're never done very well. It's a huge problem. And the second thing is that I think that just the kind of design, production, aesthetic, kind of capacity on the right is still very low. You see this in like say Christian media. You see like Christian films, and they're just from aesthetic point of view, they're just awful. They're aesthetically unsophisticated, unappealing. They get an audience. They make money. Actually, they're commercially viable, but they're not going to influence the culture in the same way that we would like. This is a problem on the right, wholesale. So you're starting, from a very low level. I'm maybe, let's say, not optimistic about it. I think that if you're a kind of investor or you're a philanthropist looking to put money, I think what you want to do aesthetically and artistically on the right is invest in low-cost methods of media production. I think that that is, print, literary journals, book publishing, podcasts, videos, documentaries. I think that that's probably the best investment right now. And from those low-cost kind of artistic means, then you can start to build the structures around them and then get involved in a bit more kind of high stakes, high production value, high aesthetic efforts.
I think that all sounds about right. I guess what I would add to that is, if you spend enough time in Hollywood, you start to just kind of absorb some of these factoids by osmosis. And so one of the greatest sources of revenue, one of the best returns on investment in the Hollywood film space is just like schlocky horror movies. You can do like a Paranormal Activity, like 1 through 8 or whatever sequel they're on. And, you got to put up a little money up front, but those things really make their money back. And rather than...
Yeah, they're like the Blumhouse stuff. And then another dirty secret from Hollywood is that, family films make a ton of money, but they don't get Academy Awards.
Yeah.
So, and they don't, they're not Marvel movies or whatever. There's like kind of lucrative genre films that can be made. I think one bright spot is, Daily Wire is kind of stepping into this territory. I don't know that it will be successful. I don't know, there's no guarantee of that, but I think it's admirable that they're putting in, that they're trying, that they're experimenting. I don't know the financial model behind it, but I think that's another bright spot. So people are experimenting, and I think that's good. And I think that we could certainly use more creative experimentation rather than having another Hilton Hotel ballroom event with 1,000 petit bourgeois baby boomers celebrating some speech from some old news personality, which is kind of what I've seen. I'm sure you've sat through many of those, as I have, which I just feel like is something that has to be wound down entirely.
Well, I think you're right about that. I'm probably a little more optimistic than you are on the creative front. I know your dance card's pretty full, but if you're watching this and you care about this too, whether it's on the creative side or the investment side, talk to me, drop me a message. I know some folks care about these things too, and I think there's a real gateway that people can ride through in these crazy times. Chris Rufo, one final question. Next year, what can we expect from you?
Yeah, next year we're running this Logos Fellowship with Manhattan Institute. We're taking these 10 culture war projects. We're going to incubate them, accelerate them. Hopefully they'll be delivering some results. I'm also working on a new book for HarperCollins, looking at activism, practical politics, kind of a response to the left's long march to the institutions. What would that look like? How can we actually win in a more broad scale? We'll be doing some reporting, some other media. So I think that the great theme, every year is a theme, CRT, gender ideology, DEI, and next year is activism per se. So activism as a principle and as a practice, that's what I'm going to be thinking about. That's what I'm going to be writing about. That's what I'm going to be doing.
Natural aristocrat Chris Rufo, you got it down to a science. Thank you for coming and joining us, and we will be keeping tabs. You can be sure of that.
Thank you.
All right, that is literally all the time we've got today. So until next time around, I am James Poulos. This is Zero Hour, and may God have mercy.